All right, so this is a video uh, in response to another video out there on the internet that was made identifying nobody. It was kept everybody anonymous, but I am aware that it was about me and a person. I'm not good at this whatever anonymity stuff, but I'm gonna try to do my best to keep this anonymous. But I have no problem identifying myself. I'm Brian Beams with Beams Aviation, and I do annuals, STCs, that sort of thing. Anyways, I'm calling this Trust if Trustworthy. This is going to explain my personal process and what I do at the start of an annual, and particularly the first time I see an airplane. The first time I see it, I've never seen it, so I need to go into the records and make sure the records are all the way they're supposed to be. I will also address some other things that were brought up in the video that this is a response to, and let's just do it. So when I first get the airplane dropped off at my hangar, I will start by printing out my checklist, which isn't listed there. But the first step is run it up, get it warm, see if there's anything wrong, do compressions, drain the oil, and then go do some paperwork. And why do I do paperwork first after the hot items are completed is because the next step on it is number 5, which is check mag to engine timing. And there's no reason to hook up your deal and check the mag timing if the 500-hour inspection is due. And that's not a required item under Part 91, but it's pretty recommended. So a lot of owners would like to have their 500-hour magneto inspection completed. And I have no idea when it was done or if it's due or what's going on at all with the airplane because I've never seen it before. So my first step is to go figure all that stuff out. But before I can do that, I actually have to decal the airplane and make a list of the actual information that is on the airplane from the data plates, because that is the most reliable source to figure out what is actually installed on the airplane. And this list here is not exhaustive. They're all going to be slightly different. Some of them have fuel injection. Sometimes I don't write down the starter and alternator because I've actually never seen an AD apply to any of the ones that I work on. But this is a response to this other video. So what I normally see the first time never seen an airplane, the first time I'm doing it, is it's very common for other shops, other mechanics to only put in the airframe, engine, and propeller, which doesn't include the air filter or ignition switch or carburetor, which all have ADs on them most of the time. So after you get the list, you load it up into ATP, and I use ATP because they are a very reliable place to put all of your appliance data. If you go and you do it for free from the FAA website, it's extremely difficult to find appliance data. And also, if you use some of the other services that are not ATP, they also struggle in the appliance area. So my favorite one is ATP. So after I get it loaded up and I populate the list, I go to the actual records of the aircraft and I try to find the most recent profile report from whoever did it, what I'm doing last time. Whoever did it last, if they did a good job, then my job is going to be super easy. But I'm a stickler for doing this because the amount of times that the last person did a good job is not the majority. So we'll go back to just starting one by one. So if the last person put previously complied with, that is, in my opinion, not adequate because it doesn't have a method or it doesn't have details. Many of these ADs have multiple steps. They have initial compliance, they have placards, they have terminating actions. You know, there's just things that you should specify when you're signing off an AD. So when I get to the AD, like this one, 632302, and it says previously complied with at engine overhaul, that makes sense. That's good. That is pretty adequate. But I just am the way I am. I've seen enough mistakes on this that, all right, this is where it gets complicated, because this is where it's trust if trustworthy. Okay, has this person made it clear to me that they are on top of the situation? And just by the image here does not give a full picture of whether this profile looked accurate or not. You really get it by looking at every single one. And the real giveaway is when every single one of them is done properly, except for you get to one. Then one of them is very unclear. And it's usually one that's difficult to verify. And they were unable to verify it And so they left it very vague. When all the other ones were not vague, all of a sudden you come across one that's vague. And it's vague because they couldn't figure it out, or they didn't want to figure it out, or whatever. And so it's wrong. So after you just see that enough times, you just verify everything. And I'm not going to explain that any further, but let's get on to 632302. Previously complied with that engine overhaul. So I don't trust this guy. I don't believe he knew that, and I think he just wrote it down. That's what I'm operating on. He very well could be right. So I go to look for the logbook. Let's find the overhaul entry. So now I'm looking for the logbook. This is the only one. Where's the entire history of the airplane, of the engine? There was none. And that's okay. It's not great, but it can be okay as long as it's in accordance with this regulation. So I find the overhaul entry at the beginning of the only logbook that this engine has, and it was in 1996, even though the engine was manufactured way before that. This was the most recent overhaul, and this is what the person referenced in their profile. They said, previously complied with at engine overhaul. And if you haven't watched the other video, then I don't know why you're watching this video, but this is a response to the other video, which explained in great detail what the AD63 is about. And it's about the valves and the cam. So, engine given major overhaul. And let me just start by saying I just greatly dislike this old school illegible writing, but it's kind of legible. It's not that bad. Engine given major overhaul and installed on Champion. I blocked out the N number. All parts cleaned, Magnaflux or Zyglode. Nixon machine honed cylinders. Installed new guides, valves, springs, keepers. And I don't know what that word is. Something exhaust. Okay. Engine assembled with new bearings and rings, standard, new connecting rod bolts, new cam and tappets, all accessories overhauled, including generator, regulator, starter, and mags. Mags given new bearings and coil points and new harness. Cylinders honed 10 thousandths over. New piston rings and rings installed with the illegible name, and it does have a number. So the AD applies to a cam part number if the exhaust valves are 7/16 inch. At this point, remember, we're at the beginning of the inspection. We're just trying to make sure the paperwork is in order, because we don't want to verify this. This is a pain in the butt. We don't want to do it, but we're doing it, and this guy is not making it easy on us, because I don't know what size valves are installed. I don't know the part number. I also don't know the cam. And since I don't have the original logbook, I don't know the manufacturer date of the engine. I don't know anything about how to determine whether or not AD 63 whatever is done or not. Because of also, it doesn't say anything about ADs in this entry. There's nothing. It's and that's what the other video got wrong. They kept saying, oh, it had a statement saying all ADs complied with. No, it did not. It did not have that statement. So I'm going to call this guy Mr. No Name. Mr. No Name here overhauled the engine and didn't give a lot of information. So we could go the other video about the use of the word overhaul, which these guys who just write it out by hand and they just don't do the protocol. They're already on thin ice. You don't know what they're doing. If they're doing things the way they're supposed to be done. If they're in a shop with the proper equipment, if they're sending it out, because there's no yellow tags. There's no yellow tags or any record other than this very limited entry. So we're not off to a good start. And as far as that other guy saying previously complied with at engine overhaul, I don't know how he determined that. You know, he just assumed everything's good because it's easier that way. It's way easier to just assume everything's good all the time and not actually know. And I used to be that way, but no, I'm not. Anyways, so after I get done reviewing every one of the ADs, I came up with this list of things that I cannot determine if they were done or if they still apply or just whatever method of compliance, because I don't have enough information. And I'm not going to go through every one of these, but those are my problems. So that's what this whole thing is about. I could just easily just move on. The other guy said it was fine, and I could reference his profile, and I could just, make mine just as vague as his, and it can continue on this way for until some other guy like me wants to do it properly and can't. And then so anyways, I don't trust the guy. That's what it is. The guy, it's not a good situation. So should I trust him? This is the reason. During coming up with this list of things, part of the reason I even wanted to verify these things is because I found multiple other errors that I don't have a list on right now, but this is the biggest one. So let's assume I trust him. We're going to pretend that I trust that guy. In his profile, under AD 980208, which says that the crankshaft must be something or other when whatever, you got to read the AD for yourself. But anyways, it applies to Lycoming 320 series, limited to 160 horsepower. And blah, blah, blah. So I had already written down all the pertinent information from the data plates, and I knew that this engine was a 150 horsepower engine. So I knew that this AD does not apply to this engine. But Mr. Guy I should trust says it's not due right now. It's gonna be due at 1,000 hours time since overhaul. So now what do I do? If I trust the guy, I've got to overhaul the engine. And if I don't trust the guy, I've got to overhaul the engine. Oh no, this is just, and I'm getting ahead of myself. I never said anything about overhauling anything. I just said I have a list of problems here that need to be fixed, verified, or determined not applicable. But at this point, I haven't touched the engine, and I don't want to touch the engine. I just want this paperwork to be in order. That's all I really want. But Mr. Guy I should trust is very unreliable. So that's why I gather the information for myself and I verify it for myself. That way I know I can trust the information. And I got pretty excited in this slideshow here. So I just thought it was funny. Yeah. Who's overhauling to? It's 1:25 a.m. and I'm exhausted. But I can't trust that guy. So let's keep going. So how do I work with this? This is what I'm up against, is original logbooks missing. Mr. No Name's overhaul entry has just barely above minimal information under the 43.2 and does not say all ADs complied with. The previous mechanic's compliance profile has proven to be untrustworthy because if I trust him, I have to overhaul the engine at 1,000 hours. And that's the only complete listing in the entire history of the aircraft. There's no other reference for any of the ADs other than the airframe logbook went back to its manufacturer. So the airframe was all good, able to determine everything pretty easily. No problems there. But when you don't have, for the engine, when you don't have the original logbook and you don't have a list, and you don't have multiple lists over every year as these things come out, it's just a real rare, it's a rare and real bad situation. Now we must verify our list. So because we don't have what we need, we have to physically or some other means make sure that these are good. So my first step is to make a bunch of phone calls to find the logbook. And I traced it back to a college. The previous airplane the engine was installed on was now donated to a college or something like that. So I asked the college if they got the logbook for the old engine that was installed on it somewhere. And they never called me back. So then I So I can't find the logbook. So now I can see some of these part numbers that are listed, and I can call Lycoming and I can ask them if that cam shaft part number could have ever been installed on this serial number engine. And they got back to me with a bunch of news that didn't help me at all in eliminating these ADs. So at this point, after making a whole bunch of phone calls just to try and get these ADs to go away without touching the airplane, I tell the owner that I've got a problem. And the owner wants to get Flappy Aviation involved. And that's what I'm calling it, is Flappy Aviation. And so Flappy Aviation tells the owner to tell me to stop all work. You gave me news I didn't want to hear, so you need to stop. And so I stopped. So still haven't touched the airplane. Just tell them I have a list of things that are not good. And if we can't figure them out, the alternative is not good. And that's where we're at. So, okay, fast forward. They agree, I guess, that it's not great that we don't have a lot of information here. But if we can just take off a rocker cover and we can measure the valves, then we can eliminate it. So now we have to actually physically touch the airplane. And I think I got this out of order, because what actually happened is me and the owner decided to do this. So we took off a rocker cover. And this is embarrassing. This is terrible for me, because I'm just an idiot. And I didn't have the measuring tools that are on the screen. I didn't own a set of those, and my regular calipers wouldn't fit between the spring. So I jerry-rigged this. Basically, I made a set of those homemade calipers out of safety wire. And so I took the safety wire and I pinched the valve, and then I pulled the safety wire out and I measured it. And I thought I got 7/16. And I didn't really think that hard about the fact that the difference between 7/16 and a half inch is 1/16, which is not a lot. And to use a piece of safety wire in place of a precise measuring tool was just not a good idea, especially for this situation. And so I'm definitely not perfect. And I apologize for that. So let's move on. So after we realized I was wrong, and I bought myself a pair of actual measuring devices, I verified the 63 AD was NA, and through other various methods, we were able to determine the rest of the list was NA, except for the AD that was issued after the overhaul was already completed. And let's see if that's next. Yeah. So this is for piston pins that were in the date range of between 95 and 96, I think. It's not written here, but in the exact date range of when the overhaul was done, these piston pins were being sent out and being installed in engines. So it says, if it could have been installed, So Mr. No Name, logbook entry guy, was very vague. And he did say pistons and rings. But he didn't mention piston pins. So it's not good. It feels like number 3 in my mind, and especially it depends on how legal you want to get with it. Because if he didn't say he replaced it, then you could assume it wasn't replaced. But then you're also still... There was another AD on these same part number piston pins at 92. And so you're back to stuck on 43.2, where he said he overhauled it, even though he didn't say he complied with any ADs. So there was still problems with the piston pins before he overhauled it. And anyways, it would have been better if there was complete records. And it also would have been better if this guy would have been more thorough. So let's go to the next one. So just in addition to that one being questionable, the other 2 that we did eliminate, but I didn't really feel good about them, was the fact that there was no record of where the crankshaft was sent for whatever it was doing, because we don't know where this overhaul happened, or if everything was in-house, if he just had a fancy facility and he was able to do whatever. But the crankshaft did not have a stamp, and if you read the 981711 CAD, Nelson should have stamped it. Then you go back to being really technical about this legal jargon, and could it have happened? Could this have happened? Why, yes, it definitely could have happened. Or could this not have happened? If there wasn't a stamp, So I'm getting I think you guys get it. So there was the same similar situation to rocker arms and their part numbers. It was very, the thing had a part number that wasn't even part of anything. So I would have to do a lot more slides and a lot more explaining to explain all of this, but the main thing to take away here is that I guess 3 ADs remained that were very uneasy, questionable, or debatable. So these are not normal procedures to have these kinds of problems during an annual. This is very rare. I've come across 2 airplanes, I think, in the past where it got to this level. and both of those ended up actually having parts that were affected by the AD and had been ignored for many years. One of them was that 150 horsepower crankshaft it was not stamped with a PID, and it should have been. And then another one had to do with, I think, superior cylinders that were installed in a certain date range. And he had been flying for years with the affected cylinders. And it's just that these things, they just don't get checked. And this is why I check them, is because they don't get checked. So when you get into something where there's a high likelihood that it could have the affected thing based on all of the surrounding information and the context that we're in, I tend to choose the safe side. So if there is a question in the air about what's going on and you can't determine the answer to the question, why not just take the safe side? Because nobody will die by having the affected parts, and all of these questions can be settled, and we'll know if we just do the safe thing. And if I have a good relationship with the local FSDO, and I ask him from time to time about guidance, and I just think, what would my ASI do? What would he say in this situation? And sometimes I do ask him. Sometimes I just think about what he might say. And it's pretty obvious. He would take the safe side. What would the manufacturer tell me to do if I asked the manufacturer? He would tell me to take the safe side. So everybody would just, when it's this debatable and it's this messy, you just do the safe thing. And the downside to that is it costs a lot of money for the customer. And it was probably unnecessary to put that in there. But it goes against, Flappy Aviation's principles of never mind. So additional considerations. After discussing this with the owner and having the AD 97, which was after the overhaul, and the questionable piston pin, we decided we would pull one cylinder to determine what piston pin was installed. And before we did that, I said, the only issue with pulling a cylinder is if we find corrosion in here. And we've got a picture here of one of the hydraulic tappet bodies and riding against the cam. And I, even with this terrible quality image here, you can see that it was badly spalled, along with 7 out of 8. We just had one good one. It wasn't spalled for some reason, but the rest were in really bad shape. And there's a whole bunch of material in the manual that lays out what is severe and what's not. So that's it. That's my side of what happened with those ADs. And that addresses the errors as far as dates. It addresses the lack of even mentioning the absence of a logbook and the multiple other ADs that were also in question. It also failed to mention that the previous profiles had major errors, and it just didn't. The video that was made by the other entity just I think maybe non-intentionally they just didn't have all of the information, and I understand that they're creating content, and this is an interesting discussion, and maybe this true story is just a vehicle to deliver the content in an entertaining kind of way. So I shouldn't take it personally, but it is frustrating to be the voiceless person who this story is being made about. So I made this video, even though that's not what I do, to address the errors and omissions. And so there's a little bit more, I think, that was said in the video that is in addition to the story. And it has to do with the Part 91 regulations versus Part 43 and who they apply to. So the question is, does your mechanic test your ELT at your annual inspection? Because FAR 91 207D says that your ELT must be tested every 12 calendar months. And that is a Part 91 regulation. So let's see what my next slide is. Oh no. Okay, so I'll just explain. Let's go to the next slide. So it's practicality versus legality. Legally, it's Part 91. It's the owner's responsibility to test their ELT every 12 months. I'm sure that's probably under preventative maintenance. I don't really know. But it's either their job to do it or their job to hire someone to do it for them. But it's not the mechanic's job, apparently, because the mechanic only has to do Part 43. And I think Appendix D doesn't have the ELT. I should probably have checked that before I use that as an example. But say it doesn't have the ELT on it, and the Part 91 is the only thing requiring the ELT to be tested, it would be very irresponsible of a mechanic doing an annual to not test the ELT. It's just a given that whether it's Part 91 or Part 43, the mechanic is going to test the ELT during the annual inspection because it just makes sense to do that. So the more obscure example is 91-417 that requires you, the owner, to have a list of ADs and their method of compliance, the next due date for recurring ones, and etc. So, in the video, it basically said it's not the mechanic's problem, it's the owner's problem, and so what's the solution? So when you get to the solution, that's where we get into practicality. Is what's the owner going to do? He's going to send it back to the mechanic and say, why didn't you do this? And I'm going to say, in this fictitious world, I'm going to say, because it's not my responsibility to do that. And they say, well, I hired you to do an annual. Why? So you didn't test my ELT or provide me with the list of ADs? And I say, yeah, that's your job. It's under Part 91. That's not under Part 43. So, I think in this example, I'm going to lose this customer, probably, because that's just it's just a silly way to think about it, that it's not my responsibility. He hired me to do a thing, and at the end of the thing, the annual, he expected he would be legally allowed to fly his airplane around without any additional items needing to be done. And that's the understanding, the practical understanding. So regardless of what the legality is and the scope of what I'm signing, in all practicality, I'm making the airplane flyable from both the mechanic and the pilot's perspective when it leaves the shop. And that requires me as a mechanic to comply with, maybe require isn't the word. It involves me as a mechanic complying with Part 91 regulations as a service to the owner or pilot or operator. And so the owner, whether he knows his obligations or not, is irrelevant, because I should be doing it in the first place. So my takeaway from this whole thing is to avoid all of this nonsense by keeping detailed, organized, and complete records that have above and beyond the minimum information. As brief as possible is good, because it does say brief in there, but while still including the information that may be applicable at a later date if an AD or other circumstance arises. So in my opinion, that would include part numbers, serial numbers, each individual AD, and each recurring AD in its next due time. And by extension, this isn't really part of it, but it is also very helpful in organized record keeping, is having a binder with dividers. And you've got your weight and balance in order by date, with the original equipment list and weight and balance from the manufacturer at the beginning, and each revision to the weight and balance throughout its entire history. So weight and balance, 337s, their associated STCs, their permission letters, their instructions for continued airworthiness, their flight manual supplements, and the 337 itself should also be in order from oldest to newest, and it should be just very clean and organized, and it's I keep a separate, what I keep separate is invoices, the yellow tags, the authorized release certificates. We still keep those, but they're not needed as often, especially if the logbook entry is adequate. Then the yellow tags and those sorts of things can be kept relatively disorganized, but still there. And I think that's it. Okay. Have a great day.